Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our pop-up PD webinar this afternoon on Canada's Essential Skills Framework, updates, changes, and implications for all of us. It is my honor to introduce our session moderator, Joanne Cottery from Community Literacy of Ontario. She will provide an introduction to our host. Go ahead, Joanne.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Our host today is Barb Glass, who is someone who has a great curiosity and passion for learning and adult learners, and it will just be a joy to work with today. Barb started at the York Region Board of Education, and then she was for 23 years at Canada College teaching adult upgrading and pre-apprenticeship. Then she went over to Conestoga College and Niagara College after that as an Associate Dean of the Access Programs. Most recently, Barb's been working as the Executive Director at the College Sector Committee for Adult Upgrading and just brings her passion to learning to many things. So welcome everyone, and go ahead, Barb.
Thanks very much, Joanne, for that introduction. And Sarah, thank you as always for the technical support and assistance in getting our webinars online and ready to go. The current slide just has a few items of note about the pop-up PD for Literacy Educators series. In addition to my role today, I am a member of that working group, that committee, so I would invite you to have a look at those bullets, especially if you've never been attended a pop-up PD session before. They have been going on for some years, and we changed the name a couple of years ago. They were formerly the online community of practice webinars. As noted in the second last bullet, all of the webinar presentations, recording links, and transcripts are available. And if you have some ideas for webinar topics for future sessions, please feel free to send us an email, and the committee can certainly review those suggestions. We always do request, if possible, that you complete a short evaluation at the end of the webinar, and later in the webinar, Sarah will post that link in the chat, and we'll probably post it a couple of times just to ensure that even if you have to leave a little bit early, you would be able to complete the evaluation for us. It will also be available at the very end. We'll provide the link, as I said, a couple of times. So having said that, we'll get right into today's session. Again, welcome. We do have a sort of a three-way partnership of presenters today, and we'll briefly walk through the content as follows. We'll talk a little bit very briefly about the purpose of the session. We'll introduce our colleagues who are here to help present today. And then in terms of content and topics, we'll be talking about the renewal of Canada's Essential Skills Framework, as well as a few comments around some implications for essential skills assessment tools that may currently be in use, and then we'll wrap up. Joanne and Tamara will keep an eye on the chat and help us to keep an eye on questions. There are a couple of natural breaks in the presentations where we'll pause for questions. So we'll keep an eye on them in the chat and address them at those breaks. So if you're logged in, then I'm sure you're probably familiar with the purpose of today's session. There is some renewal of the Federal Essential Skills Framework that has been ongoing for some time now. You may have been involved in some other way or in some other format in hearing about some of them. So the Federal Office of Literacy and Essential Skills has not publicly launched the framework yet, but has certainly undergone many consultations and continues to do so. And so we'll be hearing from some of the representatives from OLS a little bit later in the presentation to provide some high-level information and highlights in terms of what they can share at this point around the new framework. Then the second part, once we hear a little bit about the framework, is to just briefly talk about what are some of the implications of possible changes to the framework based on some of the current essential skills assessment tools that are in use, particularly the ones that are more widely in use that you may be familiar with. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our guests from the federal government, from the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills. And just before I do that, I'll also introduce our other partners that are on the line today. So as Joanne said, I'm currently the executive director of the CSC, one of the LBS funded support organizations, and we represent the college sector academic upgrading programs. We also have a number of other lines of business, and today I'm here in the capacity of both the CSCED and also to talk to address a little bit about our essential skills assessment tools. We also provide the ACE Distance e-channel LBS program, and so the three circles represent our three general lines of business. I'm very happy today also to have Sandra Hennessy with us. Many of you know Sandra from lots and lots of work over the years, both when she was at Fanshawe College and then certainly in the last several years when she's been working directly with the CSC as our essential skills consultant and lead. So very happy to have Sandy here today. The Essential Skills Group is also a longtime partner of the CSCs, and Michael Herzog is with us today. He's the founder and partner of the Essential Skills Group. And so Michael will be talking to us a little bit later about some of the implications for essential skills assessment tools, in particular with relation to some upcoming changes in the federal framework. So specifically today, we have some federal government partners with us. They are from Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC. You might have been familiar with the previous name, HRDC, but for many years now, that area has been known as ESDC. So Annette Vermaten is the director of the OLIS Office of Literacy and Essential Skills within the Skills and Employment branch at ESDC. So welcome, Annette. We're happy that you're here today. Andrea Horton manages the Employment Program Policy and Design Directorate. And you can see both Annette and Andrea, and I think they gave us a little wave there a second ago as we were introducing. And we planned to have Chris Furco with us as well, a policy analyst with OLIS. Unfortunately, Chris had some last minute health issues to take care of, so he won't be with us today. But very pleased to welcome Annette and Andrea today. So by way of just looking back a little bit, I pulled out these just very small pieces of information from the OLIS homepage on the Government of Canada website. So the role of OLIS is to help Canadians improve their literacy and essential skills to better adapt, to better prepare for, get, and keep a job, and adapt and succeed at work. And then further, OLIS is working closely with provincial and territorial governments to support the integration of essential skills into employment and training programs, which they in large part deliver, and for which they are further supported by federal labor market transfers such as the Canada Job Fund and Labor Market Development Agreements. So most of you on the line would be very well aware that much of the funding we use in Ontario to deliver the Literacy and Basic Skills program does come from the federal labor market development agreements. And just a little bit further by the way of background, the original Essential Skills Framework developed by OLIS back in the late 80s contained 9 essential skills. It was launched in the early 90s. And the following definition, as you can see in those 3 bulleted points, was both the working definition and then the final definition of literacy and essential skills as we approach it here in Canada. And I think the fact that OLIS is now looking at renewing the framework is very timely. The workforce, the labor market, so many conditions have changed over the past few decades. And so it's very timely that OLIS is undertaking this review and updating right now. And we're really pleased to be able to get a little preview of what's to come. So with that, I would now like to turn things over to Andrea Horton, and she will continue and walk through the next few slides to provide some further information. I just noticed as I look at the slide that we changed it at the very last minute when Chris was not able to be here. So the job title on the slide isn't quite the same as the one you saw a few minutes ago. But Andrea, we know you're the manager of the directorate. So we again welcome you and invite you to carry on from here.
Great. Thank you very much, Barb. Thanks for that introduction. That's okay. I have been a policy analyst, so I don't take too much offense. We want to thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this event today. We're really pleased to come and talk about the work that we've been doing and look forward to discussion afterwards. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as Barb was saying, it is a very good time, good opportune time to be looking at renewing the essential skills framework. We know that the labor market is rapidly changing, and I think we've seen that exponentially so in the last 8 months since the pandemic started. And this requires a lot of strong levels of foundational skills and social emotional skills, or soft skills as some people call them. And one of the ways that we define these skills is through our skills framework. So as you know, the current essential skills framework does have some kind of social emotional skills in them. We have oral communication, we have working with others, things like that. But we thought that it was a good time to take a look at what's happening in the world and in Canada and really update that framework to make sure that it is defining the skills that people really need in the labor market today. So we've been working on this renewal for about 1.5 years now, and we've been doing a lot of research. And as Barb mentioned, we've been doing a lot of engagement with different stakeholders across the country, training providers, education institutions, employers, provincial and territorial governments, researchers, all kinds of different groups that have helped to inform where we're going. And I know that some of you may have seen some drafts of the new framework, what it's going to look like. I just want to mention that this is still very much a draft. It has not been officially finalized or approved yet. So it could change again before it's made public. And we're not quite sure when that will happen, but we will definitely let you know so that you can be aware of it when it comes out. So as I said, this new framework we think will help workers identify the skills they need to adapt in the current environment, and it will also help employers and training providers to support people to develop those skills. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more on the labor market. According to the PIAC study, the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies that was done by the OECD and released in 2012, more than 45% of workers have literacy and numeracy skills that are at level 2 or below out of 5 levels. And other research has found that most of the jobs of today really require a level 3 or above. So that tells us that there's a lot of workers that don't have the levels of skills that they would need to really succeed in a lot of the jobs that are available. We also know, of course, that there's a lot of technological development and it's always changing. And people need to have foundational skills or essential skills to be able to adapt and learn new technologies, learn new jobs and occupations. A study by, it was the Government of Canada Advisory Council on Economic Growth, found that most employers are actually looking for soft skills when they're hiring people. 67% of them said that that was a priority for them. So compared to 52%, and obviously these are some employers reporting different skills that they're looking for, but 52% were looking for technical skills. So soft skills are more important to many employers than technical skills. So we really need to think about how we're helping people develop those skills. On the other hand, several different research studies have shown that employers have decreased their investments in skills training over the last couple of decades. And the training that does take place tends to be more focused on higher skilled workers, whereas the lower skilled workers not surprisingly, would really benefit from this kind of upskilling or reskilling. So it's important that the right people get the right training in order to develop these skills. Next slide, please. As Barb mentioned, the original Essential Skills Framework was developed in the early 1990s. And so we've been working on that for almost 3 decades now. And of course, many of you have been involved for a long time as well. So that means that we've learned a lot about what works and what the impacts of essential skills training is. This is just a few examples from some of the projects that OLAS has funded over the last few years. So a project that we funded with the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation that provided essential skills training to workers in the hospitality sector found that employers got a 23% return on investment on the skills training that they provided. Excuse me. And it had lots of other benefits too, including an increase in job retention, productivity, reduced absenteeism, and a number of other things. Another study that was done based on PIAC data that was done by Data Angel and a couple of other researchers found that if you were to increase the literacy levels of the country by 1%, it would have, or it could have, up to a 5% increase in labor productivity and a 3% increase in per capita GDP. So even a small increase in overall literacy would really be very beneficial to the economy as a whole. And then, of course, the purpose of a lot of skills training is skills improvement. And so one study, again by SRDC, found that targeted training of just 20 hours or even less in some cases helped to improve the skills levels of employees enough to improve their productivity and have other benefits too. So we're not talking about very, very long periods of training, but even small targeted training interventions can be beneficial. And especially for those who have had bad experiences with education in the past, this kind of training can be very good for them, because it's more relevant and it's less scary perhaps than some of the formal education that they've been doing. And again, formal education, the credentials that people are getting from post-secondary education or elsewhere is not necessarily either developing soft skills or demonstrating that people have the soft skills. And that's what really employers are looking for. So we need to think about how we can do that differently. Next slide, please. Now, again, the importance of social emotional skills. And I think this is one of the main themes for our renewal of the Essential Skills Framework. So as I said before, these are the skills that we need for effective social interaction. Some people call them human skills, soft skills. There's 21st century skills. There's so many different ways to call them. So there's definitely no consensus on that. But there is consensus on their importance. So these skills, they're not discrete. They all interact with each other and they can be adapted to different situations. So that's one of the qualities, is that they're transferable. So you can use them in many different contexts. So this will be, as I said, very big piece of our renewed framework. We know that some of these skills will be more relevant depending on what occupation you're in, or perhaps depending on what training course or education course you're pursuing. Different population groups might want to focus on different skills. So the framework is meant to be very adaptable depending on the needs of the learners. Okay, next slide, please. So, as I said before, we really want to be able to help workers make sure that they have the skills they need to be able to either succeed in the jobs they have, or to enter or re-enter the labor market, or to transition to new jobs, whether it's because their current job has become automated, so they want to or need to transition to something different, or their job has perhaps been affected by the pandemic and they're looking to get back into the labor force. So it's really important that people have these foundational and transferable skills that they can then demonstrate and apply in a different occupation or context. Another important part of the renewed framework is a focus on inclusivity. So looking at certain groups that currently face barriers to participation in education and training programs, and that have barriers to entering the labor market or succeeding or advancing in the labor market. And so I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a minute, but that is one of the objectives of the new framework as well. Of course, we all know that digital skills is incredibly important these days and has evolved a lot since the framework first came out in the early 1990s. So that is also an important part of the framework that is being developed. Okay, so I think that's it. So the next slide, please. So as I said, we want to really increase our focus on inclusivity of individuals and groups that are currently facing challenges or are being excluded from certain opportunities. And one of the ways that the framework does this is to promote basically understanding of differences. So some of the skills will really focus on understanding those differences and recognizing them and you know, accepting them and accepting different people. And so that's one of the goals of the framework. Another piece is basically recognizing the skills that people have. So again, it's not just about credentials, but people that are currently vulnerable or excluded or underrepresented may have a lot of these social emotional skills. But because perhaps they don't have the formal education certification, they may be passed over for jobs. So we want to kind of help people demonstrate those skills, and employers that are looking for those skills will try to be, you know, there will hopefully be better matches again between the skills that the people have and the employers that are looking for the skills. So the kind of a twofold focus on inclusivity there. Okay, next slide, please. To guide the renewal of the framework, we developed some criteria that we wanted to make sure that the framework itself and the skills that are included in the framework follow, so that we could make sure that the framework achieved the goals that we wanted. And so there's 4 criteria here. One is that they are transferable. So again, as with the original Essential Skills Framework, these are going to be skills that are needed in pretty much every occupation. And it'll be different degrees in different occupations, but they will generally be used to some extent. We also recognize that the skills are used outside of the work environment, of course, in people's lives, in communities, in education and training situations. But we know that the skills that we include have to have relevance in the workplace. So that is all there. The skills have to be teachable. So you have to be able to work with people in a way to help them improve their skills. And these are not, you know, traits, personality traits or things like that that are difficult to change. And related to that is there has to be a way of demonstrating progress in that skill. So different ways of assessing and demonstrating how someone has advanced in that skill, or what skills they have, or what competency they have, I guess, in that skill or proficiency. And that's going to be challenging for the social and emotional skills. As we all know, there's different ways, there could be different ways of assessing those than there might be of the, say, skills like literacy and numeracy. So that will be a challenge that we will work with our partners on going forward. And finally, that the skills are recognized. So as I said, we've been doing a lot of research on international frameworks, on Canadian frameworks that are used in different provinces and territories. And and looking at what skills employers are looking for and engaging with lots of different stakeholders. So we feel that there's a lot of rigor behind the skills that are part of the new framework. Next slide. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. As I said, we are still working on the details of when the new framework will be released, but we will be sure to keep you in the loop about what is happening, and we're excited about it. And so we're looking forward to sharing it with people and discussing with different people as we go forward. We're going to, just as we have with the current Essential Skills Framework, we're looking forward to working with lots of stakeholders on developing tools that will support the development of these skills and assessment, and testing out whether this model makes sense in terms of, are these the right skills that we need for the labor market of today? I think that is about it for me. I don't know, Annette, if you wanted to add anything that I may have missed.
Thanks, Andrea. Wonderful job. So I would suggest that we open it up to, unless Barb wants to say something, to questions and answers, and Andrea or myself or others can take those after everyone else had a chance to do their part of the presentation.
So if it's okay, there have been a couple of questions that have come in through the chat, starting with the draft that I think you mentioned, Andrea. You mentioned that, it's not finalized yet, but if people are interested in getting their hands on a copy of the draft, where would they look? If anywhere.
Well, you can't find it. Annette, did you want to answer that?
So we would ask you to be patient. We're hoping that we'll be able to share something soon. In the meantime, we're not in a position to share a draft of it. That being said, I think many people have seen draft versions of it, which will give you a lot of insight into what we think it will look like and the skills that are being identified.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've seen at least one document that referenced some of this. So maybe if we can find something, we can share it. People have also asked if the recording is going to be circulated. So Joanne has answered that question in the chat, in that yes, it's being recorded and it will be put on the Learning Networks of Ontario website and on the website for Contact North. And usually it's available quite soon. It all depends on Sarah's workload, which is considerable, but usually within a week or two. Sarah, is that fair to say that the recordings become available?
We always aim to have them up by the following week. So one thing we do is we check the recording files and the audio transcripts. We try to edit a little bit to make sure that the spelling isn't dreadful for our panelists' names and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question that was put forward is that in relation to soft skills, often employers want to see certification, and will that be addressed as part of the new framework?
So it's not something that will be part of the new framework when it is released. It is something that we are interested in exploring. There are some organizations that are working on testing that kind of thing, but it's not something that we've done before. So again, certainly interested in seeing what opportunities there could be for that, but we're definitely not, making any plans or commitments for that at the moment.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that's all that I saw come in through the chat. I do encourage all of our participants, if you do have questions, please use the chat and make sure you get them recorded there so we can make sure that they get addressed.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Annette, for the overview, the summary. We're pleased to see as much as you have been able to share today, and I know we'll all anxiously be awaiting more details as they come out. And Andrea, I appreciate your stepping in for Chris and doing an excellent job of walking through the particular content that you had set up for today. And thank you also for addressing those questions, and Tamara for guiding that discussion. I was keeping an eye on the chat as well while both Andrea and Annette were speaking. And so yeah, it looks like we've covered things and we can just move along now. Because we're in the business of education and assessment, as you know, being part of that, most of us have at some point worked with an essential skills type assessment tool. There are a number of them readily available, some not so readily available, some have fees attached to them, some don't, some are completely psychometrically validated and continue to be, others are more homegrown tools. So there's a lot of different assessment tools out there in use across the country, and certainly I'm sure across more than just Canada. You might be familiar with one of the earliest ones in Canada that was TOWS, the Test of Workplace Essential Skills. Another one somewhat later than TOWS was PDQ, Pros Document Use Quantitative Literacy. And there's been a few others on sort of a national scale since then. Again, there are some that you're probably using in your own programs now that are a little bit smaller scale, but still do the job in terms of what you need for your students and your clients. There are a couple of tools that the CSC created, developed through our partnership with the Essential Skills Group in the last 10 years or so. You may be familiar with some of them. We're not going to speak to them at length today, but just rather using them as an example of some of the changes and implications for the essential skills assessment tools in a more, in a wider context. Because of the changes that WOLIS is proposing and will eventually be finalizing around the framework, certainly the assessment pieces will also have to change. So currently the CSC has two tools under our skills marker brand. I know some of you are familiar with them, possibly even using them. We have the Essential Skills for Employment and Education, or EASY tool. And we also have Essential Skills for Ontario tradespeople. And we've done some recent updates to the EASY tool, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But right now, I'd like to turn things over to our partner, Michael Herzog, and he'll just walk through a little bit more detail around the implications for essential skills assessment tools. So Michael, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Hi, Barb. Thanks for the invite. So this is literally the first time in 6 months I've worn a sports jacket. So I'm not that I could write it off or anything, but I'm happy actually to finally to dress up a little bit. I've actually got a belt on today too, so I'm welcome the opportunity to speak here today. So as Barb mentioned, we've actually been working with the CSC for 10 years now. And it started with the creation of their ESAW tool, and it's moved on to EASY. And from the get-go, it's been actually really, really interesting to work with CSC because they have been very kind of values driven. And the first thing that they've always specified to me and always kind of insisted on is anything that we do in terms of the assessments, they have to be developmental. And what they meant by that was they didn't want an assessment to simply say, hey, this is where your skills are, see you bye. They wanted a system that says, here's where your skills are, and what does this mean in terms of your future within school, future within employment, and so forth, future within training. So they always viewed it as being developmental so that people could take stock of where they are, and through CSC programs and through the learning plans they developed through our tool, again, to provide people with opportunities to step up the ladder, so to speak, towards greater prosperity and greater success at school, at work. So those have been one of the fundamental principles that they have always kind of adhered to. And the second thing was around accessibility. They wanted all the students in Ontario, all the learners, and all employees have access to tools which work. So their leadership has actually, I think, shown a lot of kind of foresight, and it's been proven in the numbers. So roughly 309. You can switch a slide if you don't mind. Thank you. So since we first started, roughly 309,000 assessments have been completed. So actually the numbers have gone up, and roughly 275 assessments per day. And so I think thanks goes out to the CSC again for having this vision, and for all of you, all of the partners, many of whom are here today, because you've led to some of this success for sure. So we can move to the next slide. So because of the updates which Olis has talked about, and because of the recognition that skills are changing, the needs of learners and needs of employers and trainers are changing, we've started moving on adding new assessments to the system. We knew that through our work with Olis, that some things would stay the same, some things would change. But again, throughout all this change, we understood that the key reasons for this change was for basically being, learner and employer centric. That all these changes are all about better equipping learners and better supplying employers with the type of worker they need to be able to run their operations efficiently. So what we've done in part of this process is that we've reassigned some document use questions into reading and into numeracy, simply because they fit better within those domains. We've also added 4 different assessments. So we've added writing, digital skills, listening, and problem-solving skills to the assessment suite. And these are all basically menu-driven. So if, for example, writing is not particularly important to a training provider, they don't actually have to assign those assessments to their learners. So basically it's menu-driven. And again, it goes back to the whole notion of being trainer, learner, employer centric, so that we want be able to provide the assessments and the learning activities that learners need to be successful. And some skills may be important and others may not be. So the idea being is let's focus on the skills which are important. The other thing we've done is, and this was the big change, was the assessments now operating on Easy are smartphone accessible, which means that learners who only have access to smartphones can now take assessments and access their learning activities on their smartphone. And the big reason for this is that roughly 40% of Canadians only access the internet via their smartphone. So this is one of the changes that that were made because of, again, trying to be, in this case, learner-centric. So this change was made this spring, and again, it's trying to kind of anticipate the needs of learners and employers and so forth. So that was a big change. So where are we? So we basically know, again, that some things are changing and some things are going to stay the same. And one of the things which will likely change is that they're going to be introducing, they being Olis, are going to be introducing the whole notion of soft skill assessments into the framework. So soft skills can include things like teamwork / collaboration, could include things like being adaptable, creative, innovative. So those are all kind of aspects of what might be comprised of soft skills. So what's happening right now is on behalf of the CSE, we're actually researching what those elements might be, and are going to be looking at developing some of those assessments, putting them online, and then actually assessing the relevance and the efficiency and the utility of those assessments moving forward. One of the fantastic things about working with the CSE, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that we have so many people taking assessments. whenever you create a new assessment, one of the key things you need to do is you need to actually assess its utility and its psychometric properties. And the only way you can do that is through actually having people who are using the tool take the tool, so that we can again determine its utility, how effective it is, and whether or not it's accurate. So the fantastic thing about working with the CSC is, again, when we come up with these tools, we actually have people who can help us test and validate the accuracy of these instruments. And I believe that's the end of mine. Are there questions or comments?
Yeah, a few questions have come up. So one of the first questions that I had actually was, and I apologize, this might actually go back to Andrea, but what is the timeline for finalizing the new framework?
Sorry, just saying. Unfortunately, we don't have the answer to that yet. We would love to know as well. We expect it won't be in the far distant future, but we definitely can't give a date at this point, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough. Here might be another question that perhaps can't be answered by anybody on the call. Anne-Marie has asked, is there any word on the street that the Ontario government might move more closely towards essential skills language or try to integrate more essential skills language and performance measures in literacy and basic skills programming? Does anybody want to tackle that one?
I can say from my point of view that I have not been involved in any discussions of that nature. I don't know where our provincial government colleagues are in terms of their interactions with OLIS and the new framework. So I personally, I can't make a comment on that.
Okay, I have a feeling that probably there isn't anybody who can on today's call, but I do believe it's a good question, and certainly something that a lot of people in Ontario, I think, have been wondering ever since the Essential Skills Framework was first introduced at the federal level. It doesn't quite look the same, walk the same, talk the same as what we're using in Ontario, which is it's a bit of a challenge, right? We feel like we're often modifying materials. So probably something that maybe the provincial support orgs might be able to raise to the ministry to try to get a sense of where they might be at. Another, it's an observation really, but somebody has shared that their understanding is that the EASY tool is used mostly in the college upgrading programs, as they're too high to use in the school board or community programs where the literacy levels of learners are much lower. So it is an observation, but for those who may not be as familiar with EASY, is there anything that folks today want to say in response to that? Is that accurate, that description?
I can maybe speak to that. So one of the things we've done with EASY, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, is we've actually created a streaming process whereby clients with lower skills are automatically streamed to lower complexity questions. So, so that might help it. Sandy, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting there.
That's okay. That's okay.
3 or 4 years ago, we did a project with a number of the community-based organizations. And as a result of that, two kind of different tools or pieces were developed. Even with the creation of a second, less challenging assessment set up for lower level students, there were still some programs that wanted some help deciding whether they should even register their students to take it. So we developed a paper version of a piece that they can go through and decide whether they should exempt them from the assessment or use it. And then built into the assessment now is an upfront locator piece where there are the first 6 questions determine whether the test taker has the skills to do test A or test B. Test A is less challenging and test B is more challenging and tests higher up the 500-point scale. As for colleges being the only user, no, I would say we're about, there are more colleges, but I would say 50%, not quite 50% are colleges, and the other 50% is made up of community-based and school board programs. And certainly there have been a lot more assessments being used since the pandemic as people have started to move over to the distance delivery mode.
Thanks, Sandy. I think this question in general is just kind of relevant, that as the new framework unfolds, we are definitely going to want to make sure that there are tools that are available for learners all along the spectrum. But thanks for providing that insight into that particular question. I'm not necessarily going to go through these in order because I'm going to jump to this next question, which is EASY still free?
I can
No.
address that one.
Yes, go ahead.
Or Sandy, why don't you? You're still on the line.
No, about a year ago, we moved to an e-commerce format. Up to that point, we'd had enough provincial projects that we were able to financially sustain it. But as you all know, projects dried up and went away. And so our hosting and updating and administering costs had to be looked after. So colleges receive it free, and those programs that had participated in any of our projects and continued to use it continue with it for free. Now anyone new signing up goes on the e-commerce, and it starts at $35 per assessment. So that's for all 6 assessments, both pre and post. But as the number of purchase go up, then the price comes down.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to taking them in order because I don't want to miss anybody. So Alan has raised a query. He said, I would question if the existing essential skills framework could be described as developmental in detail regarding reading and writing. How does that impact CSE's objective to focus on developmental approaches?
So Alan, we're not suggesting that the framework is developmental, but just that in our assessment tools, we're trying to take a developmental approach in that a person isn't just receiving a score, but they're receiving a score, some feedback on the skills that they have demonstrated, as well as the skill gaps that are evident through the assessment, as well as a learning plan of multiple free online activities which the test taker could use to develop their skills if they wish to do so on their own, or it could be used in a program where the facilitator or the instructor is accessing some of those resources. So developmental in the sense that we want to provide the test taker with ways to help him or herself develop their skills, not just land on saying, here's your score, off you go, see you later. So Alan, does that clarify your question?
And even to build on a little bit more, so with these learning plans, you know, folks who have lower skills, they have more activities on their learning plan. But if you're to score at level 3, and level 3, as Andrew was speaking about, is kind of seen right now as kind of the benchmark. So folks who score at level 3, they don't get anything on their learning plan because they are no longer considered to be in a developmental phase for that particular skill.
Thanks,
I did see a response from Alan, so I think he thanks you for your answer. This is more of a logistical question. If we continue to administer the EASY, should we continue to refer to it as the EASY or as the skills marker assessment?
Skills marker.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was clear. Excellent.
We're trying to
And
phase out the name. Sometimes we're still using a skills, an easy / skills marker or skills marker / easy, but we're trying to marry the two names and then separate from easy, just sort of as a transition.
all right, for those on the call, you're hearing it now that it is henceforward to be referred to as skills marker, which is great.
Yeah. Even if we call it easy from time to time. We have 10 years of history with that name.
Although it does have a very different connotation if you don't see the ESEE part. Okay, Vanessa would like to know, is there any data that the community-based and school board usage is for learners who are on the post-secondary pathway or those on the employment pathway, for example?
No, we don't collect their goal path on the assessment survey.
Okay, thank you. Sarah is reminding people that if you have to leave early, we would really love it if you could complete the evaluation, and the link is there in the chat. Okay, and this one goes back to easy and is asking if the ministry will update easy to skills marker on their forms. Probably the answer to that is who knows, but does anybody want to answer that question?
I can.
Our experience in having them update that form is maybe in 10 years.
Interesting question though, because the CSC is currently collecting through our college staff some suggested updates to the form, and we will be forwarding those to our ministry colleagues. Not sure if they'll be implementing them or not, but that's one of the suggestions that we'll be making. You know, as all of you know who use the form, it does get reissued every year or two when there's different updates. So we're hoping they'll take into account some of our suggestions, that being one of them. But as Sandy says, one never knows.
So it's a matter of stay tuned, but if it's not updated, it won't be for lack of trying. So
Right.
That's
and
always
just
good.
Because it still says easy on there, it doesn't mean that we haven't changed the name.
Right. Okay, and Joanne, you can clarify if I'm wrong, but I think that's everything that I see through the chat.
Yes, I think you captured everything. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much, both Tamara and Joanne, for keeping an eye on the chat and facilitating that Q&A session. And again, thanks to our panelists for weighing in a number of different capacities to provide some extra feedback to the participants today. Michael, I did notice the jacket, so I concur. So just to summarize, you know, we've had a fairly you know, a good hour of discussion today and then a lot of information. OLIS will continue to work on launching the updated Essential Skills Framework, and will provide us with updates. And, you know, even though there isn't a specific timeline for releasing the new framework, we're really looking forward to seeing it at whatever point it's ready. I think it's given us some food for thought today. In terms of our programming, and you know, even though we don't have specifics, we know that some changes are coming and can start considering that. I pulled a quote in the second bullet of the current slide from some of the material that Andrea presented earlier. Technological advancements are putting a premium on foundational and social emotional skills to adapt and thrive. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but it really did jump out at me in some of the material that OLIS provided, that just how critical and important and very realistic that statement is, and also does have implications not only for the labor market and the workforce, but for our training and education that we're providing. Second half of the presentation, we did talk a little bit about how assessment tools will have to evolve as changes come about in the framework. We weren't trying to do a selling job on the skills marker tools. Again, we were just trying to use it as a basis, as an example of some of the changes that we've undertaken that other providers of assessment tools may also have to consider in one form or another going forward. But really appreciate your comments and questions around easy, crossed out skills marker, and ESOT, the other tool that we have as well. So yes, we will have to stay tuned and consider, once we see the finalized framework, how that might apply and will apply to our programming. And then, of course, how the Ontario government may also choose to work with us on that, provide additional information and so on. Another unknown. We don't know too much about that yet, as was evidenced in our discussion.
However, Barb, sorry to interrupt here, but somebody has posed a question that I think might bear some further chat here. Susie says, I'm still confused. If the ES framework is federal, how is it affecting our provincial-based LBS programs? To me, this could be a webinar in and of itself, but I do feel like it's a very good question, a very logical question, and I'm wondering who would like to approach that first.
Andrea or Annette, would you like to describe that or address that?
Okay, so I'm happy to address it to a certain degree. So the federal, it's a great question. And so the federal essential skills framework is a framework that really is federal, and it's completely voluntary for provinces and territories, for stakeholders, etc., to adopt it. That being said, it does provide guidance from a pan-Canadian perspective on the types of skills to focus on. And with that in mind, many provinces and territories across the country use the federal essential skills framework in their programming. And for a number of reasons, because within the federal government, there's a capacity to do research and to have discussions with various different stakeholders, and to really come to a consensus on what skills could be. And for that reason, some jurisdictions adopt the framework in the work that they're doing. And same thing with stakeholders, service organizations across the country. In terms of Ontario actually does not use the existing essential skills framework. However, it borrows from it heavily in various different components, and uses some of our tools and resources that have been developed over the years. As part of the work that we've been doing in renewing the essential skills framework, Ontario has participated in different engagement discussions, and is completely up to speed on what we're doing, and the approach that we're taking and the approach that they're taking aligns with our mutual priorities. So that being said, it becomes a decision by the provincial government, Ontario, if they choose to embed it into their skills programming. So it's a to be confirmed if and how, what different elements they take in terms of their skills programming. I hope that's helpful.
I think that was a great clarification, Annette, so thank you.
It's Tamara here, and I'm just ad-libbing here because I'm helping to moderate. But I think that while we focused on implications for essential skills-based assessment tools, the reality is that skills discussions are blooming all over the place in terms of employers talking about skills. Obviously, the pandemic has highlighted skill sets that need to be attended to. And one of the challenges, I think, for those of us who work more frontline is that, you know, having even those basic conversations about what skills are and defining them is challenging when there are different sources of information. I mean, certainly all of our employers are not well versed in literacy and basic skills programs such that they can explain the adult literacy curriculum framework. So they might be getting information through an association about the federal skills listings. And then, you know, if we talk about it differently using literacy and basic skills language, it can actually add to confusion as opposed to clarifying. So I certainly hope that the Ontario government may be open to using a similar language, because a new framework means that, you know, there's more than just assessment that we need to get our heads around. It's going to mean talking about skills in a more hopefully uniform and updated way with all of our community partners. So.
Well said, Tamara.
Thanks, Barb. Okay, so are we pretty much finished our official part of the presentation then?
I think we are. I just wanted to take a moment again and thank our guests and panelists, Anita Vermatten, Andrea Horton, Chris Furco, who, although wasn't with us today, certainly participated in the planning and creating the material for the OLIS portion of the presentation. And of course, Michael Herzog and Sandy Hennessy. I'm really thankful for the collaboration that went into providing the session today and putting everything together and figuring out who was speaking to what when. So thank you to our colleagues. And of course, thank you to Sarah, as I mentioned at the beginning, for your great technical expertise, and Tamara and Joanne for moderating today. So with that, I think that we are wrapped up, and I'll turn it back over to Tamara and/or Joanne and Sarah.
Okay, I think that's going to be me. So thanks so much, Barb, for stepping forward and showing the leadership that you always do. Louise Lalonde has added to the chat that she thinks that we have to do a better job of conveying the message that we're offering transferable skills. I think all of us have quite a lot of work on the horizon around soft skills, redefining skills, figuring out how to deliver relevant skills training in the time that we're living. So I totally agree, Louise, and I think that it's part of what's to come. So on your slide, you can see that there's a reminder about the webinar resources. The used to be called the Online Community of Practice, now called Pop-Up PD. But all of our past webinars are available recorded along with transcripts. Please do complete the evaluation. They are important. And as a committee, we review them after every session to see if there's something that we could be doing differently or better. And you will see that we also have a registration link for our next webinar, should anybody feel that they want to attend our session that is upcoming. So I'd like to thank everybody very much for attending on what I'm sure is a busy afternoon for everyone. It was great information, and I feel cutting edge information. So thanks so much to everybody.
Thanks, Mira. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Andrea and Annette, Michael, Sandy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. The webinar is going to end now, and watch for messaging about the webinar recording, which we do intend to post next week. Thanks, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.